words don't actually mean what they mean, at least when it comes to pet food. Apparently there's a huge difference between beef, beef dinner, and with beef. Even though, I mean, obviously we'd all think it would be made of beef. And then there's weird buzzwords like, flavor or raw coated. And this one, I totally roll my eyes. Like, what does that even mean? So in this video, we're going to talk about the different types of pet foods. We're going to see how they're made, how they differ, and what they contain based on what you can read on a bag of dog food. So kibble is produced by extrusion. That means that the recipe is mixed together and then it's heated to very, very high temperature, 392 degrees Fahrenheit or 200 degrees Celsius, to dry the food up and produce the kibble that you are used to seeing. Unfortunately, because it's heated to such high temperatures, kibble is actually low in certain nutrients such as amino acids proline and lysine, omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, and vitamin A, vitamin E, and the group B vitamins. Air-dried kibble is produced by mixing the recipe and then drying the kibble at temperatures that are a little bit lower, usually up to 140 Fahrenheit or 60 degrees Celsius. This is similar to producing dried meats or jerky as we would produce them if we had a home dehydrator. Some nutrients are lost, but not nearly as much as with commercial kibble. Freeze-dried kibble is mixed and then it's frozen and then it's dehydrated, mostly while it's still in the frozen state. This means that because it keeps at such low temperature, it will keep a much better nutrient profile than the other two types of kibble. Canned food is produced by mixing the recipe and then placing it in a sterilized container and then heating that up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit or 121 degrees Celsius for 80 minutes to completely sterilize it. Just like with regular kibble, a lot of nutrients are lost during this heating phase. Finally, we have raw food, which is, just as the word says, raw meat, raw organs, raw bones, and they are usually mixed together and sold in the frozen state. Now, some raw feeders like me eventually go and buy the ingredients singularly and then we make our own recipe. But if you are just thinking about starting with raw, then you can definitely dip your toe in by buying some of the pre-made raw mixes that are available now. So a good question to ask is, cooking actually makes meats more digestible. Wouldn't that be the same for our animals? Wouldn't heating up the food just like we do it for us make it better for them? And the answer is no. And I'll tell you why. So humans have actually been cooking their meats and their foods for at least 400,000 years. Well, dogs and cats have only been eating pre-made food since the beginning of the 1900s. Other than that, they would get scraps and then they would go and hunt on their own. So their bodies are definitely not made to consume pre-made meats, while we have actually evolved as a species to eat cooked food. So there's also a new kid on the block, which is raw-powered or raw-coated kibble. And my first thought when I saw it was, what on earth does that even mean? How can kibble, which is processed at high temperature, actually be raw? So raw-coated kibble is just general kibble that at the end of the process is rolled into some freeze-dried ingredients to give it a little bit of that taste that freeze-dried ingredients can contain. Now, obviously, it was raw at one point in time, then it was freeze-dried, and then it was added to a kibble that doesn't have the nutrition that raw food would have. So the next thing that you need to look at within these is the actual name of the food, because manufacturers are very tricky. They have really good marketing systems, and they use words to kind of trick us into thinking that we're feeding one thing when it's actually another. So if the name is very simple, like beef for dogs, tuna for cats, then that's actually what it is. Now, this is the FDA that regulates what words can be said and what cannot be said. And if a manufacturer says that it is the actual word, so lamb for dogs, it needs to contain at least 95% lamb. Now, you have to keep in mind though that because it's cooked, after cooking it will lose a little bit. So usually that means that the final product will contain about 70% lamb, but it's still a pretty good choice. If the food contains two names, so tuna and salmon for cats, it will need to contain 95% of tuna and salmon, meaning that tuna and salmon together will have to come up to 95% of the food. Now you can check on this by going and looking at the ingredients. Now the FDA actually requires that ingredients be listed in order of amount. So the ones present in higher amount actually are first on the list, and the ones last on the list are in the smallest amount. This can be sneaky. They can kind of, play with this again a little bit, but, kind of so far so good. Where we need to pay extra attention is if the food contains buzzwords like dinner, meal, recipe, formula. These actually don't mean what we think they do. If these words are present, the FDA requires that the food contain only 25% of that ingredient. That means that if it's tuna for cats, it's 95% tuna. But if it's tuna recipe for cats, that means it only contains 25% tuna. So we need to be a little bit more careful if we have sensitive or allergic animals, because that means that there are other ingredients that might be present in larger amounts than the one listed. And the one listed is usually not the first one anymore, but the second, the third, or in the first place. Now with this buzzword as well, if you have two words, so chicken and rabbit dinner, then chicken and rabbit together will make up 25% of the food. And then we have the most infamous of buzzwords, with. So think about if we were to go out to a restaurant and order chicken, I would expect to receive chicken as my main dish. But if I go and order pasta with chicken, then I would expect it to be mostly pasta and then to have some chicken on it. And unfortunately, that's also true for pet foods. So the FDA regulates that if the wording is with chicken, it contains 3% of the ingredients listed. So in this case, 3% chicken, which of course, it's much lower than what we would think when we read the label. The last buzzword that I'm sure by now you're not gonna fall for is flavor. So does it actually contain that ingredients if it's flavored? Of course not. It has to contain something that makes it taste like it, but it doesn't need to actually be present within the food. Funny how they like to play with our animals' health, huh? And just using little words. But now that we know, we actually can avoid some of these pitfalls. The next thing that we need to do is turn that bag around and look at the ingredients. And this is kind of the next obstacle sometimes because they use really weird words to describe things. But really, once you know what to look for, it's super simple to figure out what exactly is in your dog food. We'll go over all of this in this video over here, so if you're interested, go ahead and check it out. Thank you for watching us. Give us a like if you enjoyed this video. Give your dog and cat a kiss from us, and we'll see you in the next one.